Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
And me, Ravi Abbott.
Episode number 26 already, over a quarter of a century old.
Yeah, and we've done 24 hours of podcasting now, guys. So if you want to spend the whole day listening to us, you can.
You did point that out to me the other day, that someone could actually start listening at midnight one day. And now we'd be going till 2 a.m. the following day now, wouldn't we?
God,
so,
I don't know who'd want to do that.
If anyone would like to attempt that world record, Ravi will buy you a pint.
Yeah.
Now, if you're new to the show, we come out every single Friday. You can download it from our website, theretrohour.com, or on all the big podcast clients as well, iTunes, Stitcher. We even put it on YouTube every week.
Yeah, there's Stitcher, there's tons. What is it? All the little apps that you can get for your phone as well.
Many.
We're on all of them.
Too many.
Can't name them all.
However, if you do have a favourite podcast client that we're not on just yet, then of course do let us know and we'll try our best to get on there. I think Google Music is finally launching their podcast service in the UK in the summer.
Didn't you get it on Amiga as well?
Oh, I've got it on Amicast on the Amiga, yeah. If anyone needs instructions, I can link them up. So every Friday the show comes out, Ravi and I recap all the retro gaming stories of the week, and then in the second half of the show, we hand over to a guest who is either influential or very inspirational to us. Someone who's got a big history in the world of video games and someone who had, did something really worthwhile in the past, or maybe is still going today, like this lady who we've got on.
Yeah, Rebecca Berger Heineman. She has worked throughout the video industry since she was 14. She managed to sneak in there. Mm-hmm. And she's worked for Sony, Amazon, Bloomberg, Ubisoft, EA. She co-founded the Interplay Productions.
And she's the lady behind stuff like how she did the Another World port to the Super Nintendo, worked on the 3DO, and, she's got, I think her career started when she won a National Space Invaders tournament in 1980. So
she did Bard's Tale as well, and Tall Tales in Tasstown as well.
So you've seen it all.
Yeah, definitely. So up to the Kinect.
Yeah.
She's been working with.
Well, I was looking at her website before, doing stuff on the PS4 at the moment and stuff. So, it's a career that spans more than 30 years. That's incredible, isn't it, in this industry? So, Rebecca will be on the show in around half an hour from now. Before that, though, let's get into this week's big stories in the world of retro. Now, the first one is actually a friend of ours who's had contact with a star. Now, we did mention on the show over the last couple of weeks, Nas, the rapper, had a Rob the Robot and a NES in his room.
Calvin Harris. There was a Kanye as well talking about Amiga.
Yeah, so now our friend Aaron White, who is part of the RGDS podcast, and Aaron's a top lad. We got drunk with him in Blackpool after play, didn't we?
Yeah, totally. He's been reconverting Amiga tunes, so he's kind of been getting modern stuff, sampling it with an old sampler, shoving it onto mod format on floppy disk release for the geeks, and he's been transposing Commodore 64 tunes as well, so kind of by ear listening to it and then
just doing it,
inputting the notes. Yeah.
So he's had contact with maybe not the coolest guy in rap music, however, he's been going a long time.
Shaggy, it wasn't me.
Mr. Bombastic.
Yeah.
So tell us what's happened here then.
Well, he's done this latest tune, Shaggy featuring Jovi Rockwell, I Got You. I haven't heard the tune personally.
I'll be honest, I didn't know Shaggy was still making music, to be fair.
But checked it. It's a 2016 tune. He just put it out, and he'd put it out on this Amiga disc and kind of tweeted it. Now, Shaggy's producer actually tweeted back, "This is really cool, man." And he started having a conversation with him, and I think Shaggy's producer couldn't believe that it actually fit on like less than 1 megabyte.
It's on a floppy disk.
Yeah, totally. So he's created an MP3 of it, but not even that. He's created a full video of it on Pro Tracker, and the producer said, "I'm going to make sure Shaggy sees this and play it to him personally because I think it's really cool."
So the Shagster might be looking on eBay for an Amiga 1200 sitting there.
He might be sitting there watching Pro Tracker videos.
Do you want to hear a bit of it then?
Yeah, go for it.
Arn in the streets looking fly with my friend on me. Smile on my face so sweet like a cinnamon. Arn in the streets looking fly with my friend on me.
James Brown sample in it. That's Shaggy.
Yep. You can really tell the 8-bit sampling there, can't you?
But like you said, I mean, I'm impressed that he fit all of these samples onto a floppy disk, because there's a lot of samples going on there.
Yeah, he's got a lot of skill. He's been also doing a lot of sample ripping, so kind of games with mods built in. He's been using various tools from demo groups and stuff to rip out the protection and extract the mods from certain tunes. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, check out his stuff. It's really good. on gaming corners as well, or just look for RGDS. I'm sure there's all these RGDS releases coming out at the moment.
Well, I downloaded that, and it actually comes on a bootable Amiga floppy disk. You put it in, he's got like a nice intro screen there.
Yeah, I just downloaded it, double-clicked it, Amiga Forever, opened it up, and then Shaggy.
So we'll stick a link in the show notes at theretrohour.com if you want to get your Shaggy on this weekend.
Yeah, I was speaking to him, and he said his mind was blown. He would never think of this happening as a kid.
Yeah.
You know, like Mr. Bombastic, and he's listening to your Amiga tune in 2016. It's nuts.
I mean, I know we've been, ripping Shaggy a bit, but let's be honest, he's a guy that's been in the industry for like 25, 30 odd years now.
Yeah, he's massive. He's massive. And he's kind of a bit better than Shabba Ranks and stuff in the, global kind of profile. He's much more well known, isn't he?
Oh,
in
dude,
America and stuff. And
It Wasn't Me. You remember that song?
Yeah.
Summer 2001, Iron Appa.
Yeah.
Won't say much more about that holiday, but we are a family-friendly podcast.
That's it.
So we'll pop links to the ADF file if you want to download it at theretrohour.com. Now, this is sad. The end of an era. A gaming show on TV has come to an end.
I saw a bit of it, actually, and I found it incredibly boring.
Okay, this is Video Game Nation.
Yeah, I thought this was going to be a really cool kind of, revival and a cool kind of new Games Master or something like this, but it was pretty dry from what I saw. It was on Challenge TV.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was problem number one, probably. It's on Challenge TV. Second one, it's on 10:30 on a Saturday morning, which, I'll be honest, as a guy that hasn't got kids and anything like that and doesn't work Saturday mornings, I'm very rarely awake before midday on a Saturday.
And I don't know if it was aimed at kids. It may seem to be aimed at the older crowd, Yeah,
well, there's this article here on denofgeek.com, and they kind of do a little retrospective on this, and then also other old school gaming shows like Games Master and When Games Attack and stuff like that they talk about too. I have seen a few clips of Video Game Nation on YouTube looking at it, but it kind of reminded me a bit from what I've seen as like kind of like a gaming version of the Gadget Show. It was a bit like
kind of a cheap rip-off, but it's sad to see that going though. It's good to have a regular gaming one, but the change is that there's a new gaming channel coming on Freeview, which is going to be esports. So we're going to have the first esports on Freeview and Sky, which is going to be 24-hour gaming TV. So.
Like a live Twitch kind of stream then, pretty much.
Yeah, kind of League of Legends tournaments and stuff like that. So it'll be the first gaming channel in the UK. So as this show goes, a whole channel arrives.
I mean, if you look back at Games Master and that, though, I mean, essentially a good 50% of that show was what you'd probably define today as esports, wasn't it? It was competitive gaming, wasn't it?
Competitive playing together. And the thing about that Games Master as well was when they dropped Games Master, it was making a massive amount of viewing figures. The viewing figures, Hollyoaks, which replaced it, have never hit. So, they dropped it when it was successful.
Yeah.
I don't think this Video Game Nation has that kind of...
But then, I mean, you mentioned about this new channel coming as well. And I've got to admit, I'm not massively into like League of Legends and stuff like that. But if I'm at home and, I've got my PS4 on, I'll often open the Twitch app and just, if there is an esports tournament on, I'll put it on while I'm tidying up or whatever.
Yeah, I guess I'll have the major ones as well on there, So it depends who they have rights with and stuff.
Yeah, so 24 hours is quite a lot to fill though, isn't it? So that'll be quite interesting to see. So do you know when that's going to launch?
No, I just saw a little article about it. I think it's coming out soon.
All right, well, we'll keep you up to date
as
we hear more. Now, I didn't expect to be saying this. A Sega game for the Dreamcast has been found.
Yeah, and this isn't one of your homebrews. This is an official Sega project.
And a big
prototype that came out in 2001. And it is Echo the Dolphin, which is amazing.
Now, Sega obviously discontinued the Dreamcast back in 2001. And apparently they were making, it was this game that was called Echo 2 Sentinels of the Universe. So this was going to be a game for the Dreamcast. Now, there is a video of it on Ars Technica. And it's a prototype, so it's kind of got all of this like debugging code and stuff around it as well. And there are like a lot of errors.
Yeah, there's kind of like frames per second counter and stuff already in there.
Yeah, and apparently you get to certain bits of the map and it's like error property not found and stuff like that flashing up. But I've got to say, I mean, I always thought the Dreamcast was quite a nice platform graphically. But looking at the gameplay of this, it looks like a really rich environment. In fact, a lot of the environments that you swim through, it reminds me a bit of Myst.
I thought, if they'd actually launched this, because they had some nice Sonic ones as well. But if they'd launched this as one of the launch titles, I reckon it would have been really successful.
It looks quite open world
nice
as well. You can, you can swim through the ocean, jump out, and even these kind of games where you can just explore these massive maps. So it's
well, they've released it and they've compiled it into a CDI image .cdi, which is used for the Dreamcast.
So you can boot it.
You can boot it. It's self-booting.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need a boot disk or anything like that, and just burn it with Image Burn and the CDI drivers, which you can find online.
Yeah, there's several websites of those, isn't there? But I think the Dreamcast, obviously, on most of them, you can download and play any game on it due to their copy protection was kind of broken quite early, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. But then there was a kind of whole conversion of booting games, so you needed to have this boot disk to get stuff to go, because it was this weird format, GD-ROM.
Yeah, wasn't it based on like the audio CD format or something? I think it was based on.
Yeah.
I think that's how they got around it, because if you put like a pirated game in, I think it kind of fools the Dreamcast into thinking it's an audio disc first.
Yeah, and you can kind of overburn on the discs as well. So, these GD-ROMs are a little bit bigger, and you can overburn on the older discs.
Yeah, a lot of them like 850 megs or something, aren't they?
Yeah.
But I mean, Echo the Dolphin, I remember when that game first came out on the Mega Drive. And my friend Martin at school had a Mega Drive, and he got Echo. I think he rented it out from I think it was either before Blockbuster, Ritz video game store or wherever they were, or video shop or whatever. And I remember us playing it, and I was never really all that into Echo the Dolphin, but I think it reminded me a bit of, James Pond on the Amiga, the first one, gameplay-wise, that kind of swimming through the ocean and that.
Yeah. It was quite good, because it was like a massive cult hit, and it was like, why? I never got it. I never got the gameplay, but lots of people seem to like Echo, and it was a big name, much bigger than Zool or something like that.
Oh, it was a beautiful game as well, graphically. I think that's what impressed me most about it.
Yeah.
That it was really nice.
And I think they've actually lived up to this beauty, bringing it into 3D here.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's the one thing about this is this game was developed just after, I think it was literally a couple of days. The last build on this has got a couple of days just before the Dreamcast cancellation announcement was made. So it was probably the final project that Sega were working on for the console. And unlike a lot of other Dreamcast projects are cancelled, it didn't actually end up on any other platforms. So this just got canned.
Damn.
So, which is
I bet there's so many good games out there that are just gathering dust and have been canned or are prototype mode still.
It's cool when they find them 15 years later, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's mad.
If you want to play this, there are free download links. You can burn it to a CD and play it on your Dreamcast. We'll pop all the links to that in the show notes at theretrohour.com. This Atari movie that we mentioned the other week.
Yeah, it's not doing so well on the Kickstarter. They've got 25 days left, I think. Yeah,
well, at the time of recording this, it's 24. So obviously the show comes out on a Friday. So it'll be 22 days at the time the show comes out. And we did mention this documentary. I mean, if you listen to, I think, last week's show or the show before, we mentioned it. And it really is a labour of love from a group of guys that want to get the story out there of Atari. Now, it's got Bill Hurd, who narrated the Growing the 8-Bit Generation documentary. And it's actually the same group of guys who are behind this.
It's called Easy to Learn, Hard to Master, The Fate of Atari.
They want to tell a story in 100 minutes of essentially the untold story of Atari, isn't it, from the people that were involved in this. And I'm quite surprised that, I don't know whether it's just it hasn't been publicised enough.
Yeah.
Of course, they're about halfway there at the moment. They've got 9,165 euros at the time of recording this. But with 22 days, they need to get over 20,000 for this film to come out.
And I really want to see this, guy. So please, if you can spread it, even if you can't donate, just spread it and get as many people knowing as possible, because this story is massive, the Atari one. And I am really shocked. Why is it not being pushed that much?
The only thing I can think of is, we've posted it on our Facebook page today, and I've seen a couple of people go, I didn't even heard about this, and there's only 20 days left. I think it might just be a case of that. So again, if you got friends that love Atari, or, I mean, we always we rag on Atari a bit in like a jokey way, because, we grew up with Amigas, but it's always been, it's one of the most legendary companies in the history of video games. And
totally.
We want to hear this story.
Yeah, totally. I want to hear all the ups and downs.
Absolutely. So
I love the drama.
Well, there was a lot of it at Atari as well, and the people in here that have never told their story before. So it'll be, Nolan Bushnell's obviously in it as well, and by the looks of it, it goes all the way up to the Jaguar period as well. So I'm sure there's a few, as you mentioned, drama. I'm sure there's a lot of it around that time. So
$20 as well. You get a download of it, and $20. What's that? £10?
Yeah, about 12, 13, yeah. Not much at all. I mean,
Nothing at all.
spend that around in my local pub.
Yeah,
it's quite a
Two
posh,
pints,
quite
mate.
a posh pub. So if you want to back this, we implore you, anyone that has a passion for video games, which we hope anyone that listens to this show would. The links will be on the show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, do you remember all this kicking off years ago when originally the PS3, you could boot a Linux distribution on it? Do you remember?
Yeah, and I thought this was great. I thought this was a kind of, a thing where these home devices would be opened up and people would be able to add in mods, and then they just shut it down and did completely the opposite, closed the whole system off and said, we don't want it open.
Well, I remember a lot of the... Amiga OS 4, that runs on PowerPC, and I think the PS3's got a cell processor, which is kind of part of the power range. And a lot of them were like, port Amiga OS to it, which at one time there was a lot of people saying, that's bound to happen. But then it was quite a while ago now. I didn't realise it had been this long. 2010, 6 years ago, they released that firmware update that blocked the Linux distributions on it. Now, a few people were quite peed off at that move, weren't they?
I remember speaking to RJ, and RJ Michael from Google, and he developed the PlayStation 2, helped work on that team. He really liked the idea of having the OS in there. So I think he was a bit miffed as well when it got taken out.
Well, I remember reading stories of people having like clusters of PS3s and like using them as like, combined computers basically.
Bitcoin miners or something, yeah.
Well, they're pretty powerful for the day, you know what I mean? Like with a GPU and stuff in there as well. And a few people were that annoyed that they'd actually gone out and bought a PS3 specifically for this and took Sony to court over it.
Was it Yellow Dog Linux? I remember.
I think it was. It was. And you download it to a DVD and you could, just install it on the hard disk. So a few people that actually went out to buy this have done this. It must have been quite a long-lasting litigation. 6 years this has been going through the courts. Wow. And finally, there's been a settlement. So Sony and its lawyers could be paying out to as many as 10 million console owners. So what they've got to do is, anyone that apparently bought a PS3 specifically to run Linux on it could be eligible to receive $55 from Sony.
So how do you actually prove that you did it? Because you could say, I tried to install Linux and then it didn't work because of the firmware, so I just played games. Is there like... Did you have to have just tried to install Linux and left it alone?
Well, it says here, apparently this still needs a judge's signature on it yet, but this is what the settlement says so far. So to get the $55, a gamer must attest under oath to their purchase of the product and installation of Linux, provide proof of purchase or a serial number and a PlayStation Network sign-in ID, and then, it doesn't say how, they have to submit some proof of their use of the other OS functionality.
Oh my God. So, how many people do you think are going to do this claim? Like, a tiny amount.
Well, how do you do that? Do you if you took a picture of maybe your PS3 running Linux in 2010, how are you going to prove it?
Hosted a website. I don't know, yeah.
I guess if you had maybe a PS3 that was kind of bricked or something, or
maybe if you'd registered with a Linux distro or something.
Yeah, maybe. I reckon there are going to be a few people trying it on with Sony, though.
Yeah, there could be a guy that buys up loads of them. I swear on oath that these 500 machines were dedicated farmers.
No, $55, though, not to be sniffed at.
No.
So, if you want to find out how you can get your cash from Sony, apparently they're going to be emailing everyone on the PSN email list. That's part of the litigation, so look out for the email in your inbox soon. Now, Nintendo's a company that we do cover from time to time, even though obviously they are still a modern company and kind of relevant in the world of modern gaming.
Yep.
And the fact that they've been in the industry for such a long time, I think it's always quite interesting to keep tabs on what they're up to today. Now, did you watch any of E3 in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I've started to see stuff about the new Zelda game, and quite a lot of my friends are kind of split. Half of them are saying this looks awful and half are saying it's great. Because the thing with Zelda is it always changes every game. Yeah. And this one hasn't changed much, so I think it's annoyed if you were the Zelda hardcore.
And the fact that was really the only thing they properly announced, for the Wii U at E3. However, of course, the next console, the NX, is meant to be out before the end of this year. They're kind of estimating now.
Oh, that's soon.
Well, I'd heard rumours that maybe before Christmas this year. Yeah,
oh, wow.
So Wii U development may be kind of winding down. But there's a guy called Reggie Fils-Aimé who's been at Nintendo for years, and at E3 this year, Bloomberg did an interview with him, and they asked him a few questions about how the NX compares to the the new PS4 Nemo and the Xbox Scorpion, asking him kind of, does it matter that the hardware is not up to spec, compared to the new consoles? And this is what he had to say. Have a listen to this.
So now your competitors talked about their forthcoming, the Xbox and a new PlayStation. How do you think the NX console will stack up to them?
For us, it's not about specs, it's not about teraflops, it's not about the horsepower of a particular system. For us, it's about the content. Nintendo is a content-focused company. We create entertainment that makes people smile. So for us, we're focused on bringing our best entertainment to both the Wii U as well as the NX in the future. So for us, whatever Microsoft and Sony are doing in terms of talking about new systems, that's for them to fight out in that red ocean. For us, we want to make sure we're bringing our best content forward. And right now, the reaction to Zelda has been more than we could have ever imagined.
So that's what he said, talking about the NX, essentially saying compared to the new PS4 and the Xbox, they're not going to be on the same playing field.
I think they've took a different direction, and
well, you say that.
They've got to stick to it.
Let me play you a clip that Forbes, from a Forbes interview with the same guy, back in 2013.
Okay, let's see.
When the Wii U first got announced.
So Nintendo launches the Wii U. It's your first high-definition console. It's very high-powered. Now, 6 months to a year later, when your competitors' products come out, specs-wise, they show up a lot faster, a lot more memory. Like, when you look at the numbers, they come out far ahead. How big a problem is that of, well, we got out there first, so now our product looks maybe a little dated in comparison?
The processing power of the hardware really doesn't matter. And I say that with confidence looking at the most recent generation of home consoles, where the Wii, which the broad industry looked at and said, boy, this seems to be underpowered, but sold 100 million units globally. And the consumer saw the innovation of the Wii Remote and the active gameplay we offered. Even if you look at the generation before that, it was Sony's product that was underpowered compared to the other two home consoles, and yet they won that generation. So in the end, it comes down to the games. And again, we feel very good about the games we have, not only from a first-party perspective, but from a third-party as well.
So that was when the Wii U had just come out, around the time that the Xbox One and PS4 got announced. Essentially said the same thing 3 years apart, didn't they?
Yeah, and it's kind of showing no progression.
You haven't really learned, it sounds like, from the disaster that was the Wii U.
But, okay, he's saying exactly the same thing. Yeah, and he hasn't learned it because of the Wii U, because that was years ago, when the Wii was that popular. And, yes, it's very underpowered, and I don't know. Even it's kind of the wars of power at the moment. It's kind of back on that. It's like the Xbox.
Well, they're upgrading them, aren't they, again? Yeah,
they're upgrading them again, but they're going to 4K. But it's like the Xbox was kind of losing its edge because it wasn't as powerful as the PS4 or perceived as powerful. And I think it's all about that now. I think it's gone back to the kind of, not the space race, but the power race of consoles.
Well, I have read some people using the argument that if people really cared about power, they'd all be gaming on PCs. But I think there are an element of people that, maybe PC gaming seems a bit too much effort, so they like to stick to consoles. But you really look, and I mean, he used the argument of the Wii there, but let's face it, I think the Wii was a fluke.
Well, what's Nintendo been? Nintendo's always been casual gaming. It's always been, handhelds, which have all been replaced by phones, tablets,
I think it has in the last couple of decades, but you look back. Okay, if you discount the Wii and say, really, I mean, that console sold on a gimmick, didn't it? It was motion control.
Okay, so if we just went GameCube to Wii U. Yeah,
well, I mean, when was their last hit before the Wii? It was a Super Nintendo, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
And that was a long time ago, dude.
Yeah.
Nintendo have only really had, you count the original NES, a SNES. The N64 wasn't. It was the least popular of that generation, wasn't it? Because, well, I don't know, maybe the Saturn was kind of down there with it. PlayStation wiped the floor with it, though, anyway. And then you move on to the GameCube, again, PS2 and Xbox.
You're right, they haven't had, I'd say the most innovative thing probably was Donkey Kong Country. That was the change from the kind of playing graphics to the, massive 3D kind of pre-rendered graphics
Yeah,
instead
I
of
mean,
the 2D stuff.
And that was
know?
a great example of, their innovation in the early 90s, because, the Super Nintendo, it came out later than the Mega Drive. And it was graphically and, audio on it was better
We're
as
totally
well.
missing out the N64 here. I don't know why.
Well, we did mention the N64 as well, but, that, I think because it used cartridges, it got the PlayStation wiped the floor with the N64 in terms of sales figures.
Yeah.
Because people, if you could develop a 600 megabyte game, you'd do that rather than trying to get it down to 7 for the N64. But, you look before the N64 came out, I think that kind of marked the change in Nintendo's attitude, because before that, it was Project Reality, it was Silicon Graphics. They were really trying to push, the technical edge with that console.
Yeah, they were. You're completely right. They were. And kind of, I guess it's also because the PlayStation did this big trick of having Sony, who were the developers of, all the technology, so they could get the DVD player in there cheap. They could get, everything in there straight away. And remember that GameCube with the fat DVD player underneath and all of this kind of, there's all these little things like rumble packs and stuff to try and get Nintendo back to
But I think
kind of looking modern.
You probably have got the Game Boy to kind of blame for Nintendo appealing to that really kiddie audience, because that's kind of where that started, I think. But there was that change, I think, after the N64. It happened with the GameCube. You look at that, it looks like a console for 10-year-old kids.
Yeah, but I don't know. It's strange because I think also the DS is a massive market and that kind of stuff. But iPad gaming Apple has stolen so much of their market share.
I'm amazed that the DS is as popular as it is, to be honest. Now every kid's got an iPod Touch or an iPad.
Yeah, or even this stuff that we're covering, these kind of little things that you can convert your phone into a gaming platform. I think Nintendo should have been completely on that. That would have been a place that they could have dominated.
But what makes me sad about this is, by hearing those clips, and I kind of get the impression again that, I might be completely wrong, and I hope I am, but it just seems to me like they haven't learned any lessons from the Wii U at all, and the NX is doomed to repeat it.
Or they need a new marketing man, I think. Yeah.
But, to be fair, if the NX fails, that probably will be the last Nintendo console.
And you know what the thing is as well, is that really frustrates me, is that the Wii U's good.
Yeah.
It's nice, console. You've got one. I've sat there, I've played it and really bloody enjoyed it. It's just not popular because they keep, I don't know what they're doing, they just keep marketing it wrong.
Yeah, I think that's the main problem with it. Most people thought the Wii U was an add-on for the Wii.
That's it, because of the name, but it's really good. That's why I recommended on last week's show that everyone buys one, because this could become a rare...
As an investment.
As an investment, yeah. It could be like the Virtual Boy.
Yeah, but dude, Nintendo is such a historic company, mate. They've been around for so long. I don't want to see them go the way of Sega and just be, churning out games on phones in 5-10 years, but...
No, but it seems to me that they're just churning out copies of stuff, so it's always follow-ons. It'll be like a new Mario.
Yeah.
Oh, where's the new Donkey Kong? Where's the new Mario Kart and the new Zelda? It's just like a pattern that they've got stuck into, and there's not like GoldenEye coming out or something that's mind-blowing. Yeah.
Well, all of the third-party devs have left Nintendo in the last couple of generations.
Yeah.
And I think they're at a very confused place as well, because I can't really figure out who they're aiming at. On the one hand, they're aiming at the pre-teen kind of market with these cutesy little franchises in the DS. On the other hand, it seems like they're aiming at kind of late millennials, like kind of guys our age, late 20s to mid-30s, who want the Mario games and the Zeldas and all that.
Are still in with the franchises.
But they're still churning out these 20, 30-year-old franchises all the time and living on them, aren't they, half the time?
Yeah, and they're not in the VR game at all. Like, absolutely at all. All the companies are jumping on VR, and they had the 3D on the DS. You could switch the screen. That's about as much as I've seen from Nintendo.
Watch them bring back the Virtual Boy now.
That'll be it. They were the original VR guys, weren't they?
Got burnt once.
Yeah, I actually saw that you could they converted Virtual Boy games to the HTC Vive.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
So you can play them without the flicker.
If you want to get your migraine up.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for checking out episode number 26 of the Retro Hour. Next week's show will be out on Friday, as always, available from Mixcloud, SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube, your favourite podcast client. And, of course, do follow us on Twitter. We have been tweeting away a bit this week.
Yeah, and our Facebook page, we've been doing loads of kind of stuff to get people interacting and chatting. And it's good stuff like, what's your favourite ZX Spectrum game? Or show us your first PC.
There's been some
first computer even.
Fierce debate on there this week, hasn't there, over which systems were best back in the day and stuff. So do join us on there. We'll put links on our website, but if you just search for the Retro Hour, you'll find us on there. Now, for the next half an hour, I reckon this is going to be really interesting. We're going to get the inside story on Rebecca Berger Heineman, including that name.
Yeah, and, the 3DO version of Doom, where they even made a a film, a kind of little intro, and they film their own Doom. God.
The 3DO version of Doom that she worked on is famously one of the worst console ports that ever came out.
We talk about everything, don't we, really?
It's quite
really good interview.
To talk about the 3DO as well, because we haven't really covered that, so Rebecca's going to speak quite a lot about that. And also her 30-year history in the video game industry, lots of interesting stories. Rebecca Heineman on the Retro Hour for the next 30 minutes, and we'll catch you next Friday. Welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, Rebecca Burger Heineman.
Hi, everybody.
Now, we've got to ask, first of all, what is it about burgers?
All right, let me give you the short version. Back in the 70s and 80s, when I first started my video game career, I really had no money. I was flat broke. And even when I started programming at Boom Corporation, even with Interplay, I was being paid like next to nothing. So to eat, there was a place called Hamburger Stand. It's a little 29-cent hamburger joint where they just slap, 2 buns and a piece of meat and then call it a burger. I would buy like about 10 or 20 of them at one shot. Then, because they didn't have a refrigerator, I just took it to my desk and I shoved it in the desk drawer. And then I would let them sit there as they worked through the day. I would reach in, grab a burger, munch on it, and then just put the drawer, forget about it. And then later on, after working a little bit more, I'd reach down there, grab another one. Well, eventually, people said, "Is that unhealthy?" And I'm like, "I don't care. They're good and whatever." So it just kept going and going. So I said, "Hey, what do you got in your drawers? Eat any good burgers lately?" And eventually the name just stuck. And so since then, there have been people in the industry who actually thought my name was just Burger.
That's great.
But in the end, I still like burgers. More I like Red Robin these days, or In-N-Out. I tend to eat more sushi than anything else.
At least you have the burgers cooked this time and not just out the drawer, yeah?
Oh, yeah. Well, they usually are start cooked. They just get to room temperature. And after you well age them for at least 48 hours, they reach the peak of flavor.
So, Rebecca, what was your first computer experience?
Oh, boy. That would be seeing the AIM 65. I remember seeing that little computer. I bought it mail order and I put it together, and I just liked playing with it. And then I found a friend of mine who just bought a brand new Apple II. They just came out. So that's like 1977, somewhere around there. And I just fell in love with it. Now, of course, I couldn't afford to buy one, but I visited his house all the time and just played with it. Until eventually my high school I was going to got a TRS-80.
Right.
So I started playing with it because the teacher didn't know what it was. I mean, the school just got some TRS-80s. They handed it to the electronics department and said, "Okay, teach the kids." Then teach them what? But then afterwards, I got some money to be able to buy a computer, but it really wasn't that much. And then by just happenstance, there was this one of those classified ad newspapers they had called the Penny Saver. I don't know if it's still around, but that was what they were doing in LA at the time. And somebody was selling an Apple II computer for $800. And I'm like, oh my God. So I called him up, excitedly rode my bike. So I went literally across LA, went to this guy's house, gave him $800, like basically every penny I had, and he gave me this Apple II in a box. It turns out that he bought the computer and he had it in a box for like a month and realized he was never really going to use it for whatever purpose, so he decided to just get rid of it. So because of it, I got myself this brand new Apple II, and just getting that thing home on a bicycle, that was an adventure.
I bet that was.
It was, but it was worth it. I got it home. I had it on my bed and had to wire it up to a TV and so forth. But I got the thing up and running, got a cassette tape, started writing programs on cassette, learning how to program it. But as time went on, I used it to help me pirate Atari 2600 cartridges, and it's what allowed me to be able to play all the Atari games, which then led to me winning those championships.
Well, we're going to talk about that, actually, because you won the National Space Invaders Championship in 1980.
That's right.
Yeah.
It was for Space Invaders for the Atari 2600. I was playing against a friend who had an Atari 2600, and he had all the cartridges, every single one of them. So I designed this card reader, so I would borrow his cartridges, copy them so I could play them at home. But I would go to his house. We would play slot racers all the time. And I kept beating him. And for whatever reason, he was just a glutton for punishment, so he kept inviting me over to beat him again. But I just got so good at it, I started playing the other Atari games, Space Invaders being one of them. Atari announced the Space Invaders tournament. He was convinced I was going to win. And I was telling him, nope, there's people out there far, far better than me. I had absolutely no self-confidence, no self-esteem, nothing. But at his insistence, he drove me up to Topanga Canyon Plaza. It's now called Westfield Topanga today, but back then it was Topanga Canyon Plaza. And that's where they held the LA Regionals. And I had the highest score by doubling the second place score. The second place had 44,000, I had 88,000. And I still remember when I turned to my score, my response was that good? I mean, did I even place? And they're like, So I won the regional, which then the prize was an all-expense-paid trip to New York City to play in the Nationals. So I then, in November, they flew me out to New York City. They put me up in this really swank hotel. And then on November, I think it was 8th, I can't remember the exact date, but it was November of 1980. We went to the Time Warner building. I think it's called 75 Rockefeller today. They then had me and the other champions from Dallas, San Francisco, New York, and Chicago. And there we were in front of the press and everything, and we battled it out to the death. Only Chicago fell out, but the other people, we kept going. So they just said, okay, after almost 2 hours, they said, that's it, high score wins. And they stopped the contest, and I ended up with the highest score.
You must have had an achy hand after that then, 2 hours.
Oh, God. As soon as they told me that the contest was over, I asked the announcers, like, does this mean we could stop playing? He says, yes, you can. I just reached over and pulled the cartridge right out of the machine. That's it. So I'm done. That's it. I'm over.
Have you ever played Space Invaders on the Atari since?
After a little while, yes, I did. But there was no Space Invaders played for a couple of weeks after that.
I bet. It must have been a magical time, though, in the late 70s, early 80s, when microcomputers were first coming around in video games, that first kind of wave of it. It must have felt quite special back then, did it?
Well, at the time, we were just programming games like anything else. I mean, now that I look back at it, says yes, it was a magical time. It's of course, when you're there, it's like when I was writing Bard's Tale 3, I really didn't have any idea that the game was going to be, as well reviewed or remembered today, such as fondly as it was. I was just making the game I wanted to play. But back then, it was like, yeah, I'm making Apple II games. I've got all these friends in the Apple II community. We were trading information. We were all learning together just how to just make better software.
Well, you did mention this kit that you made to copy Atari carts. How exactly did that work then?
Because I couldn't afford Atari cartridges, I figured out, okay, there's got to be a way of copying them or something like that. So I went out to a bunch of bulletin boards. And back then, you had your modem, you called up these phone numbers, which then logged into a bulletin board, you entered your account, and then that's where the message boards were. And of course, knowing which BBSs had the forbidden knowledge was kind of like the elite hacker underground. And I was very active in the elite hacker underground. So I had privy and access to most of the, shall we say, forbidden BBS sites. Well, with that, several of the sites actually had the pinouts of the Atari 2600 cartridges. And other sites had blueprints on how to build an Apple II integer card. And it's just a ROM cartridge, or ROM card for Apple II. Well, I looked at that and I designed, using the integer card as a basis, a ROM emulator card, where I just added a write line, put in static memory, wired up the card, plugged into my Apple II. Yes, I can read and write the memory, everything's fine. Added hardware to dual port it so I could hit a register in which the memory was either accessible by the Apple II or it's accessible to this cable, which plugs into a fake cartridge that I soldered in some connections to it. And so I made another device which allowed me to plug a cartridge into it so I can read the ROMs. And I went ahead and downloaded the ROMs, put it inside the Apple II, copied it into this thing, turned on the Atari, game ran.
Well, you did mention the BBS scene, and obviously the movie War Games came out in 1983. Did you kind of find that changed the BBS scene much? Did more people want to get into it then?
Well, more wannabes wanted to get in. People says, I want to get in the scene, but they had absolutely no idea what they were doing. So the rest of the hackers, we all just laughed at them. It's even to this day, there are people out there saying, like, we call them script kiddies today, where they think, hey, I just downloaded these scripts from the internet, and it does a denial of service attack on a website. Ooh, I caused the website to go down. I'm leaked. And we all look like, if you take down Facebook, then we'll actually give you respect. But taking down a simple BBS is child's play. That was back then with the war games. And of course, some parts of war games were like total fiction. We're like, that's not how you hack into a computer. But most of the times when you actually hack into a computer, it's so boring. Because you're just sitting there typing in numbers, typing in hex. It really doesn't make good for an actor trying to explain to an audience, hey, we hack. Instead, it's like all these graphics and pretty things. It's like, no, it's like military computers. They don't even have graphics. They just have command lines and strings and text menus.
You're not zooming down corridors virtually and all that.
Yeah.
Oh, hell no.
So, at the time, you were 14 when you were doing this, and you entered the games industry at such a young age. How did you manage to convince people to take you seriously?
I lied. Taking me seriously was the very fact that I was making Atari cartridges on my own with reverse engineering. See, by the time I entered in the professional programming, I was 17, because I won the championships when I just turned 17. It was like 16, 17. But I'd already been hacking for a couple of years. Once I won the championship, I started writing articles for Electronic Games Magazine, which then made me known to video game companies. Video game companies were contacting Electronic Games Magazine, lamenting about how they wanted to do Atari 2600 programming, but nobody would teach them, and those few programmers that are out there were asking like $1 million. Well, then Electronic Games Magazine said, hey, yeah, we know this kid here who happens to know how to program the Atari 2600. You should call her. And sure enough, they called me up, and I said, yeah, I know how to program 2600. This is how you do it. So they hired me right on that phone call.
And you pretended you were 18 years old then, did you?
Oh, yeah. They said, how old are you? 18. Sure enough, I'm legal to work. I'm legal to do this. I mean, I did have a social security number and so forth, but I definitely wasn't old enough to, let's say, sign a contract.
Mm-hmm. How long did you keep that pretense up for then?
That was about a year.
Wow.
It was about a year before I hit 18.
Well, obviously, around that time, when we got to about 1983, there was a big video game crash in North America. Did that affect you much?
Yeah, because I was, I just got a job at Atari, because after Avalon Hill, I came back to the West Coast, because I really didn't care much for the East Coast attitudes in New York at the time. This is 1982. So I went ahead and said, hey, Atari, got a job? I said, sure, bring you up here. Went there, interviewed, started a job, and then 2 weeks later, everybody got fired. Everybody. So not only I got fired, but my manager got fired, their manager, the entire building, as far as I knew, was fired. So in that case, I was just putting a deposit down on an apartment. So I just told the apartment building, apartment I was going to take, I changed my mind. And then I went back to the Motel 6 I was staying at, packed up my things, packed up my little pickup truck, and just drove home. But shortly thereafter, I got a job at Boone Corporation, and that's what led me to Interplay.
So, how did you kind of come up with the idea of Interplay and co-found it?
Well, I didn't come up with the idea. It was kind of more like it was thrown on us. So you see, we were all working at Boone Corporation, making VIC-20 games and so forth. Brian Fargo had sold his company called Sabre Software to Boone Corporation. That's how he ended up at Boone. The rest of us, Jay Patel, Troy Rowe, we just were working there. And then one day Mike Boone says, hey, I don't want to make video games anymore. I want to do whiteboards or sell ice cream. At the time, first it was ice cream at the swap meets or something. Anyways, he closed down the company. So we were all fired. And we're like, so what are we going to do? And we're like, why don't we form a company? And so, okay, because we're all fired. And at that point, Brian went ahead and got some investment capital. from a guy named Chris Wells. And with that, we then created Interplay. And I started working on the original games, whereas Jay and Troy started doing some games for a contract for that was raised extra money. While I made the original games, so that I did Mind Shadow, Tracer Sanction, which was what our first Interplay games were, which were sold to Activision, and then we just kept parlaying, and I just kept doing whatever projects we needed to keep bringing in money in the company in order for us to survive long enough to become a company. It took like 3 years before we were actually out of the woods. But for the first 3 years, it was literally like, yeah, at any moment, if anybody screws up and doesn't deliver on their milestones, we're out of money.
What was the setup at Interplay like then? I mean, was it a really small team originally?
It was only 4 people.
Yeah.
We got one person shortly after, a guy named Dave Lowry, who was our artist, because Jay, Troy, and I were all programmers. Brian was an AppleSoft programmer, but he ended up becoming more of like the CEO kind of thing. So he was doing biz dev. He was trying to get the contracts in, and we were the ones who actually did all the work.
One of the most unique games was Task Times in Tone Town. And it was a real strange kind of. Were you in a bit of a experimental mindset when you were writing that?
Well, the thing was that the main story was created by Mike and Muffy Berlin. What was going on is that what we wanted to do in Interplay is we wanted to see if we can get some Infocom talent to write a story for us. And Mike and Muffy Berlin were actually thinking about it because they did. I forgot which Infocom games they did, because Mike Berlin did a couple of Infocom text adventures. Mm-hmm. And he came up with this idea of basically, the idea of a drug trip. And we were also having visits from Timothy Leary for Neuromancer. That's another story. But there was also some people at Interplay were kind of using drugs. I never was in that scene. But the thing was that they came with the concept, and at that point, okay, so we worked together, me, Mike, and Muffy. We came up with all this plot, and I figured out all the entire game, and then scripted it together, and I wrote the engine and wrote all the tools and everything and got the game out there. And the thing, of course, with the Task Times in Tone Town was the fact that it was my first real MIDI-based music driver that I did, because like on the 2GS version, it had a soundtrack. People were going like, holy shit! Music like that coming out of a home computer? And that was 1985, 86 when I did that.
So were you into the kind of new wave and cyberpunk scene at the time at all? Or?
Oh, yeah, because I also did Neuromancer for Interplay, the Apple II version Neuromancer.
And were you playing MUDs or BBS games at all?
I did for a short while, but I really wasn't into it. I mean, the only real multi-user dungeon I was playing was like Eamon. I can't really remember how it's pronounced. It was an Apple II text adventure game system that lets you pick your adventure and go from adventure to adventure in a text adventure scene. And I liked playing with that. But other than that, I didn't really do much of the MUDs.
I was guessing because of Bard's Tale, maybe a lot of D&D might have been involved.
Well, I did play a lot of D&D. I love playing, went to a friend's house every now and then. And so occasionally I was the DM, but most of the time I was picking my character and playing. But really it got me into the computer RPGs was Wizardry. Because Bard's Tale really was a flat-out rip-off of Wizardry. We just said, hey, here's Wizardry. How can we make it better? Well, first, don't write it in Pascal. Write it in assembly. And then add the graphics. I came with all these graphic algorithms to do the 4-stage animations and stuff like that. And then when I took over the project for the 2GS versions and then Bard's Tale 3, I completely rewrote everything that was in the engine to be essentially a engine that was designed specifically to make Bard's Tale games. And it's one reason why Bard's Tale 3 was so huge is because it has a scripting engine in there that allows me to have, so many different scenarios inside of just a very small amount of memory.
Because I saw that you also improved the engine for Dragon Wars, which was meant to be the Bard's Tale, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was meant to be Bard's Tale 4, and actually I created that entire game from scratch. That was, I took everything I learned from Bard's Tale, and I just started over. So, okay, I can write events in a scripting language. I thought, hey, why don't I write the entire game in a scripting language? So I created a very simple scripting language that's designed really to make adventure, Bard's Tale-ish games, and I wrote the game in that language. So all I had to do to port the game was just port the interpreter. Kind of like you have that Scrum system that LucasArts uses to do a Maniac Mansion.
Monkey Island and all those, yeah.
Yeah, all they did was just port the interpreter to other platforms, and that's how they got the game from machine to machine. I did that very same thing with Dragon Wars.
I guess that's kind of like Lua as well at the moment.
It's kind of like that.
Yep.
But unfortunately for me, is after we did Dragon Wars, the advertising really wasn't there, so it didn't sell as well as Bard's Tale 3. It did sell really well. It just wasn't as popular. And for whatever reason, Brian at Interplay had this thing about multimedia cinematics and had this idea to do this Bard's Tale-ish game using live actors, and the game was going to be called Stone Keep. And I didn't really think that that's where we should have gone. And of course I got proven right, because the fact that they'd spent 5 years working on the game before they finally shipped it, where I never spent more than 1 year writing one of these games. So, and I did them by myself. They had a huge team to do theirs.
Well, do you think Dragon Wars would have been more successful if it had the Bard's Tale name on the franchise rather than Dragon Wars, which has no dragons involved, you know?
Yeah, that's story. I put dragons in. There are dragons, but they're more of an afterthought. It would have easily sold 3 to 4 times more copies. There's absolutely zero doubt in my mind. It would have sold that many more. But it didn't, because it was, instead of being called Bard's Tale 4, it was called Dragon Wars.
One of my favourite games that Interplay did. Did you have any involvement in Battle Chess?
Yep, I did. I did some of the ports, and I did a lot of the tools for the first Amiga game.
What did you think of that as a concept then? Because it was very unique. I remember when I first saw that game. Even as a kid that wasn't really that into chess, that game, I could just spend hours and hours on it. Especially the linking up to Amigas, I do it that way with my brother. And just those little animations, I think every kid loved that game around that time.
Oh, the idea? We ripped it off from the movie Future World. If you ever saw the movie Future World, it was like in 1984, 85, I can't remember exactly the year, but there was a scene in the movie in which you had some people in the space station, and they were sitting at a table, and inside the table was a hologram of a live action chessboard. And they had the pieces played, and they move, and the rook pulled out a bow and arrow and shot somebody. A knight came with a sword and hit the pawn. And that's where the idea came from. We said, hey, wouldn't that be cool if we actually could make a game like that, where the chess pieces kill each other? So we then brainstormed some ideas, and then it came with the idea of, why don't we just make it funny, make it really cute, which had the Monty Python references. We had, we just let the artists just figure out an animation. Say, okay, we need pawn takes pawn. What do we do? And there was no storyboarding. The artist just simply said, hey, we have the 2 pieces here. Draw me all the frames of the animation, and they just simply did it pixel by pixel using Bill X Paint, and did all the frames. We created a tool that figured out all the diffs, and that was stored, and it's really heavily compressed, but it played it back. What's hilarious was that when we were designing Battle Chess, we thought that was going to be like the B-side product.
Wow. We
were putting all of our efforts into Neuromancer, because at the time, Neuromancer was supposed to become a feature film starring Mel Gibson, and Ridley Scott was supposed to direct, and they were trying to raise the funds to do this film. So we were actually going to do a game based on the film Neuromancer. Unfortunately for us, was as we were halfway through the development of the game, the funding fell apart for the film. But we were still under contract to make the game. So we ended up having to say, based on the book, Neuromancer, blah, blah, blah. So when the game shipped, we thought that Neuromancer was going to just sell millions of copies because, based on the movie. And then Battle Chess was only going to sell 50,000, maybe at tops, because it was such, it's a chess game. Who really wants to play a chess game? It's cute. We're going to sell out more copies. That's it. We had no idea that Battle Chess was going to take off the way it did.
It's amazing how popular it was here. When I was a kid, a chess game with cute little characters, you would not think that would become a massive success. But yeah.
You'd want to play it just to see the animations, though, wouldn't you?
Yeah, just to see the killing.
Yeah, well, that was it. We actually, during its play testing, that's what everybody wanted. They just wanted to see the pieces killed. So we actually put in the chessboard editor specifically so people can make moves, place the pieces so they could then force it to make a move to see the next animation.
Well, you mentioned the Commodore Amiga in there, which I know wasn't a massive platform in the States, but it was really big over here in Europe. Mm-hmm. What did you think of that machine then and working on it?
I loved and hated it at the same time. Because Guru Meditation Era was my my arch nemesis, because I saw that so many times. I love programming the 68,000, because at the time I was doing some stuff on the Macintosh, the original 68K Mac. But the Amiga was just, I love the blitter. I love, I just wishing that kind of hardware was available on other personal computers, messing around with it. But the very fact that you had it was constantly going to the floppy disks. The hard drive support was, at the time, nowadays it's a lot better. Back then, the hard drive support was a joke. Mm-hmm. Network support was not so hot either, but you developed it on the floppy drives, and it was just a pain in the butt to do software development on the Amiga for us. But it was the best video hardware that you can get for a home computer. And the idea of the blitter, and of course my favorite things was being able to grab the top of the screen and pull it down so you could see the, I think it's called the workbench, I'm trying to remember.
Yeah.
Directly underneath it. It's like, okay, that's actually kind of cool.
Well, the Mac was black and white back then, wasn't it? And didn't have multitasking.
Oh yeah, Mac was like, the Amiga kicked its butt.
Yeah. So you did the Apple IIgs and the Super Nintendo versions of one of my all-time favourite games, Out of This World.
Yes.
Or as it's known here in the UK, Another World. Do you remember the first time you saw the original version of that then? Was it something like completely different to what you'd seen before?
Oh yeah. When we first saw the game, it was a demo that Eric Chahi showed us on the Amiga, and it was like amazing because it was essentially a side-scrolling platformer but done totally with polygon graphics, which was unheard of. And and the game, the music and the sound, everything about it was just like amazing. And of course was what led Interplay to license it for American distribution. And then Eric at first was kind of hesitant to give us a source code, but then later on I talked him into it and I got the source to it. So then I started helping him with the ports and so forth. But I still remember that when I looked at the source and realized, oh, so you're really only doing vector graphics, but here's all these cheats you're doing. It says, with these cheats, I could probably get it on even lower end systems. And that's when I then said, you know what, I could actually probably get this game running on Apple IIgs. And of course, I was told by pretty much everyone saying this game could never run on the 2GS. And I said, sure enough. So I hand translated the 68,000 code to the equivalent 65816. And sure enough, I had it running on a 2GS.
Is it true that you didn't use like the Super FX chip on the SNES port or anything like that? You just did it all?
Oh yeah. There's no super. Anybody with a ROM emulator can tell you right now. They can back me up. It's on a slow ROM with no additional hardware. I did that all with software rendering.
Well, moving on from the Super Nintendo era, after that it was a pretty strange time in gaming. You kind of had that pre-PlayStation. After the 16-bit machines, it's stuff like the Jaguar 3DO, Saturn. You obviously did some work on the 3DO. What did you think of that system first time you saw it?
It was a love-hate relationship. It's the thing with the 3DO was one, the development system was a Mac. You could not develop on the 3DO unless you were using a Mac, period, which was at that time so unheard of because everybody then was using PCs. So I remember a lot of companies out there were really pissed off that if you wanted to develop on the 3DO, in addition to spending a truckload of money on the 3DO to get licensing and so forth, you had to go out and buy Mac hardware, which was expensive, still is, comparatively speaking. You had to buy this, you had to get fiber networking, because you couldn't use Ethernet at the time, because back then it was only 10 base T. Yeah. So you had to use something bigger, and then you had to have these high-end workstations to compress video. It just goes on and on and on and on about all this expense. Granted, I was already familiar with MPW, so I was able to transition over to programming the 3DO, and I then started just churning out games on the 3DO like crazy. I did Shadowin, Kingdoms of Far Reaches, Casper the Friendly Ghost, Battle Chess, Out of This World, Wolfenstein 3D, and Doom.
Well, you've often said in the past that you're not happy with your version of Doom on the 3DO. What went wrong with that then?
Everything. Every possible thing. I even did a complete podcast of my own on my Burger Becky YouTube channel. It lasts for an hour. But in a nutshell, after I'd done Wolfenstein 3D for the 3DO, which runs at 60 frames per second, it's very responsive. It's like a perfect port.
Oh, it's the best console port of Wolfenstein I've ever played on the 3DO.
Yep. And that is what got 3DO to get a hold of me, saying, you know ID's code. Says, yes, I do. You know how to optimize the code. Yes, I do. I've already got 8 games in my repertoire. Says, can you help us with this publisher who wants to get Doom? I then get in contact with Arc Data Interactive, and they told me flat out the game was 90% complete. All I need to do was finish the game for them, get it up, optimize it, which is like, no problem. 10 weeks to go to optimize a game is pretty much done. No problem. Give me the source. Give me the source. Where's the source? You don't have the source, do you? It's like, no. So I then, in a panic, called my friends at id, who then, out of pity, send me a copy of the Jaguar Doom source. And then from that, at least I have the levels already redone to low memory and so forth, so it will actually fit on a console. At this point, it says, okay, this is a good starting point. Started working on it to get it to build on the 3DO compilers, got a lot of things fixed on it. And then that's when I come to find out that the publisher never had a copy of the game ever. They were lying to me. No way. And then it turns out they were lying to themselves. They had honestly believed to port a game from one machine to another, you just compile the code. That was it. It's like saying, oh, see this Mac game? I'm going to grab the C++ code, put it on an Amiga compiler, and now I've got an Amiga version. They really believed that's how easy it was.
It must have been a miracle. It is actually a miracle that game came out at all then.
A lot of sleepless nights. I literally lived at my desk for the last 6 or 7 weeks. And I threatened to quit that project several times. I said, that's it, I'm done. And then my friends at 3DO just begged me to stay on the project, mostly because up in the months leading to that moment, this company, Arc Data, was going everywhere, doing a press tour saying how this new version of Doom is going to be the best Doom ever. It has new levels, it has new weapons, it has new this. It's going to, and everybody was hyped up about it. They wanted Doom on the 3DO. So if Doom was to not ship, it would make 3DO look bad because everybody was expecting this game. So they were kind of caught between a rock and a hard place here because of this renegade publisher lying to everybody about the capabilities of this Doom game when the reality was not even close to what they had. So I just told the guys at 3DO, look, all I can deliver is a port of the Jaguar version. That's all I'm going to do. But I could not port the MIDI music driver that they did on the PC version to the 3DO in the time frame. By the greatest stroke of luck, the guy who runs Arc Data Interactive also plays in his own little rock band. So I gave him tapes of the music played of all the songs in Doom, and then he and his band made the soundtrack that was played in Doom for 3DO.
Oh, wow.
Because on the 3DO, to play a CD audio, it's trivial. It's like 3 lines of code. Well, so I said, great, I could, give me the MP3s, the equivalents, and I'll put them on the disc. I'll just add the 3 lines of code. There's my music for the game.
Well, I saw that you'd posted some photos of old FMV intro that they were doing for that. What happened there?
Well, you see, the guys at Arc Data Interactive actually came up with some movie story and so forth. So they want to put in interactive cutscenes into Doom. They never bothered to ask me about where did these cutscenes go in the game. So they just independently made their own cutscenes. They filmed them. They had some Hollywood actors, not really like A grades, like stunt people or wannabe actors who wanted to get a break in the industry. But they were still nevertheless actors. And they filmed these scenes. They even had that demon costume made because they understand there was even an E3 or a CES, I can't remember which, in which Arc Data had a booth, and they had a guy walking around in that demon costume advertising 3DO Doom. even though they didn't even have a prototype there. I never got a copy of all that video because I said, hey, because they asked me, we got these new weapons and new ideas for levels. So they gave me some sketches for levels, like on hand drawn on a piece of paper. It says, can you put this in the game in an hour? And I'd be like, no. Hey, I got this drawing of a new weapon. Can you put that in the game? Give me a week or two. What, can't you just put the JPEG in the game and it's a new weapon? You really don't understand how video games work.
But yeah, I've seen the stills and that of those the Doom footage. It looks a bit like a bad B movie from what I've seen. It's
oh, trust me, I haven't seen all the footage. I've seen little things. Now what I did is I took all the stills that I was able to find from my archives and I post up on my Twitter. That's what's been going around on the internet.
Yeah.
Because I post them up on Twitter. But I found a bunch of pictures. I post them one by one, just saying this is what the full motion video would have looked like. Because those are actual stills from the production. I mean, the green screen, they had the guy in the demon, they had one actor on a table with chicken guts covered with Caro syrup sitting on his butt, because the scene was supposed to be him like eating the guy while the hero sees him and they're supposed to shoot him. But it's like, I was asking, where do you expect me to put this full motion video in the game, because it has no connection whatsoever with the levels, and Doom doesn't have full motion video.
Yeah, a lot of that FMV hasn't aged well from that era, has it?
No. I mean, if you look at any of the full motion video from any of the video games back in that particular era, they're pretty laughably bad. But of course, at that time, they were cutting edge.
Were you surprised when the 3DO failed?
No, I was not surprised whatsoever. In fact, when the 3DO was in its heyday, even then I was predicting it was going to fail miserably unless they had a good Hail Mary. The biggest problem with the 3DO, and I recognized this from the get-go, was they were trying to do the business model of VHS cassette players in the video game realm. On paper, this sounds great. VHS is the technology behind the VHS video cassette. There's a consortium that licenses those patents to people who make the tapes and people who make the players. So every time you buy a VHS player, a check is written to the VHS consortium. Every time a blank video cassette is made, a check is written to the VHS consortium. So they go ahead and just make sure everybody follows their standards, but they get the checks from everybody. Trip Hawkins had the idea of, why don't I make a video game platform with that same concept? I make the platform and the programming tools. Then everybody who makes software writes a check to 3DO. Everybody who makes a player writes a check to 3DO. 3DO itself does not make consoles. Well, the idea is sound except for one problem in the video game world. Video game manufacturers like Sony, Nintendo, nowadays Microsoft, they don't make money selling consoles. They sell those consoles either at cost or below cost. They get you on the video games, or nowadays subscriptions to Xbox Live or other value-added services. That's where they make their money.
Yeah.
They don't make money on selling the consoles. That means then, in the 3DO world, you have people like Panasonic, Matsushita, Samsung. They put their consoles out at $7.99 so they can make a profit. But then you have Sony putting out their PlayStation for $2.99. Which one do you think you're going to buy?
Not a hard choice, is it?
Not a hard choice at all. So, and $7.99 is a frightfully high price to pay for a console. So it didn't take very long for people just to not buy the video game console, the 3DO. And sadly, with any console, for us to make money, we can only sell at best to 10% of the installed base. So if there's only 250,000 3DOs sold, the most number of copies we can hope to sell is 25,000 copies of the game. Like Wolf 3D, we sold 10,000 copies, which for the 3DO is kind of respectable. We had, we did that port for a very minuscule budget. So even though we only sold 10,000 copies, Interplay made a profit because we did the port at such a low price. But for something like Doom, where they didn't spend one penny yet on development just to get the rights. I think it was like $250,000. And then they spent us some money, which was, we did it for a decent price, but nevertheless, added to that number. If you can only sell 10,000 units at, their wholesale's $30, they're already at a loss. So, but then again, everybody there was, like EA was spending millions of dollars per title. So when you spend $1 million on a title, and you only sell 10,000 units, well, it kind of sours you to the platform.
So did you see much work or anything on the supposed successor, the M2?
Oh yeah, I saw the M2. I saw the M2 prototypes. It was a really, really nice machine. But at the same time, they did the same thing that caused Osborne to get screwed over, which was when the 3DO was starting to lag in sales, they went and said, well, we got the M2 coming out. It's coming out in a little while. So when that announcement came out, everybody stopped buying 3DOs, saying, well, why would I want to buy a 3DO when the M2's coming out? Kind of like the Osborne, where they started advertising the new Osborne coming out. So everybody stopped buying the current Osborne, which meant that now the company has no more money, so they couldn't actually have the money to get the new Osborne out.
So you also moved on and were working for Microsoft with the Kinect later on.
Yeah.
Are you kind of amazed at the different uses that the Kinect's had, like 3D scanning, sign language translation, and, all these kind of innovative things people are doing with it?
Oh, I am always. I mean, when we first came up with, I was added onto the Kinect when it was already well in the process. My job was to just optimize it, make it better, and cut the costs on it. But the thing about the Kinect was, when we were seeing this, it was just a brand new input device. People at Microsoft Research were already doing weird things, and we're just sitting there going like, we have really no idea what this is going to do. But once we shipped it, the first thing that came out of the hacker community was like, when can we get an SDK to hook this thing up to Windows? Because we didn't really, we had it internally for testing, but we never intended on releasing it because we didn't think anybody would want it on a PC. But then once we saw the demand that people wanted to buy a Kinect just so they could hook to the PC to do mad science, that's when we said, okay, we'll just fix up the SDK that we use internally, release it to the wild, and just hold our breath hoping that we didn't make a big mistake. But since then, I'm still amazed, even to this day, what people are using Kinect-like technology for. I mean, I saw one person use it to make a wheelchair automatically walk around, so a person could just simply, a handicapped person could just tell the thing, take me to the kitchen, and it will navigate you to the kitchen. Another one is that I saw this one where a guy was wearing this hat, which had a Kinect on it, and it made sounds that effectively this blind person can now walk outside because it was making little tones letting him know where obstacles were. Oh, right. So effectively it was a seeing eye dog.
That's crazy, isn't it?
It's crazy. And I'm like, well done. Well done.
Well, I was going to say about the Kinect, I mean, do you kind of think, obviously, Microsoft developed a new Kinect for the Xbox One. Do you kind of feel they've lost a bit of confidence in Kinect now that they're not bundling it with all the Xbox One units?
Well, it's just one where that the Kinect is a lot of money. It costs money to bundle it with the Xbox, and unfortunately, Sony doesn't have that burden. So they were having a problem in which you were selling an Xbox One for, let's say, I'm going to pull a number, $349. The PlayStation 4 sells for $299. Well, if Microsoft just got rid of the Kinect, they can easily sell it for $299. And they did find that only a small percentage of people use the Kinect. Most people just play Call of Duty or Uncharted, which is just a joypad. So they thought, you know what, let's just unbundle the Kinect, sell the Xbox One at the same price as the PS4, so at least we get more people to buy Xbox Ones, and then they can go ahead and buy the Kinect later if they actually want to use it. But for those people who use the Kinect, they love it. And also, don't forget, the Kinect does require you to have a living space where you have room to actually stand. Yeah. Not everybody's living room has that.
That's it. As a final question, what advice would you give someone who wants to become a professional, successful programmer?
To be a successful programmer, it's one, always challenge yourself and always keep learning. Like, here it is. I'm a 30-year veteran in the computer game industry. And yet, I am now cracking open a book on advanced hardware on the newest graphics chips. I'm having to learn how they're doing that, how to do the microcoding and so forth. You never rest on your laurels. There is no such thing as, the moment I hear a programmer says, oh, I already know everything, or I don't have to learn that, I say, you're not a programmer I want to hire. Because the moment you say that, that means you're now locked in the past. Maybe it might work for embedded systems or working on some bank's computer, which is never going to change for 20 years. Then fine, you can go to work at Citibank. But if you want to work at a video game company, you need to constantly evolve, constantly challenge yourself, constantly learn, attend the Hacker Fest, do mods, read all the white papers, go to SIGGRAPH, go to GDC, listen to the talks, see what other people are doing and learn from it, because there's just so much to learn. And here it is. I'm supposedly at the top of my game. No, I'm not. I'm still climbing up. I haven't reached my peak yet.
Well, Rebecca, it's been fantastic talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast this week.
Thank you very much for having me on.
No problem. If people want to find out more about what you're up to, I know you're quite active on YouTube as well. Where will people go to?
Okay, on Twitter and YouTube, go to Burger Becky. Those are my channels. Just follow me on Twitter. I'm also, my company is Old School, OLDESKUUL.com. That's where you can see, keep on our company, what's going on. We also have a Twitter page, Old School, as well as on Facebook. So just keep tabs on that to see what horrible things we're up to.
You still got an ICQ as well, I noticed, on your website.
I actually still do have ICQ.
Oh, wow.
I almost never use it. Generally, I'm on Skype or Facebook Messenger. Those are the places where people get to hold me. But if you really want to chat with me every now and then, just Skype. And again, it's Burger Becky. Gee, original.
Well, Rebecca, thank you so much. It's been amazing talking to you.
It's been really good.
It's amazing talking to you. Take care.